Welcome to the Fort Kent Historical Society Museum Complex located in Fort Kent, Maine. The complex has 5 buildings, the first of which is the Bangor and Worcester train station, built in 1902. The second is one of the oldest houses in Fort Kent. The Diggle Doobie House was built in 1839. The third is the Doobie Barn, which had been built in 1860. The complex also includes a replica, built in 2010, of the Washington School. The last building is the former Bangor and Aroostook Railroad freight shed that has been converted into the Paul D. Thibodeau Visitors Center.
Good morning, Don. Thank you for coming again to the Fort Kent Historical Society to come see our exhibits for our 150th anniversary year. This year, as you probably see, we have a lot of mini exhibits here in our main room at the Paul D. Thibodeau Visitor Center. The Visitor Center, we've owned it for 6 years now, and our goal is eventually having little small exhibits about the history of Fort Kent. And so this is a definite start to what our permanent exhibits are going to be looking like. This year being Fort Kent's 150th anniversary, we decided to honor 150 years of fashion on how our ancestors dressed themselves and how they made cloth, made clothing, and then eventually had a variety of shops and other options to purchase clothing. So that's what this exhibit was about. And we start out in this corner where we feature hand sewing, how originally they, without sewing machines, how they made their clothing. So in here we have a variety of things like thimbles and needles and scissors and all the basic needs to make cloth. Also in this display case, we have an artifact from the early 1890s. It belonged to a lady that lived here on Short Hill. Her name was Malvina Labonte Charette. And Mrs. Charette had a system using tailor rulers and different, with a guidebook, in order to make patterns for Victorian style clothing. So, and Mrs. Charette, what is really interesting is we have some of the patterns that were in the original case, and she wrote on them who they were for. So like her daughter Demise or her daughter Delphine. And she wrote in the book which dresses she made for each child. So it's interesting that a local French Acadian family, that even in the 1890s they were dressing like a typical American did. We look at their tintypes and we know that they perhaps wore homespun or perhaps wore, everyday clothing, but when they had their photo taken, they had their best, and their bests were always either store-bought in cloth or they were primarily, they only had that one outfit, that was their best outfit, but they had that for most of their lives, some of them people. So we have that display on that. And also in the display case, we have one of our oldest scrapbooks in our collection. It's from the 1850s. It belonged to Mrs. Major William Dickey. And Major Dickey, if some of you know, founded quite a few things in our community. He was a legislator for most of his life from the 1860s to the 1890s here in Fort Kent. And he was the one who brought the Madawaska Training School here, which we'll be talking about a little later on. But this scrapbook belonged to Mrs. Dickey, and she passed away in 1872. And in the 1850s and 60s, she would clip magazines and ladies' books of the type of clothing that she'd like to either make or the dreams anyway. So she compiled that scrapbook. She used an old book of her husband's and she pasted all her wants in in that book. And here, this is the only known portrait of Mrs. Dickey. She passed away in 1872. So we do know the way she's dressed, that she definitely dressed the part here in Fort Kent. Although they were part of Fort Kent's elite, they were part of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants that moved here. She definitely was very fashionable for colonial Fort Kent. So on display also, besides the pattern maker, we have what most people would probably recognize as patterns that ladies use to make clothing. So we have that. And then because of the railroad coming to Fort Kent in 1902, that opened a whole opportunity of bringing in new products, new freight. So they were able to order from catalogs like the Sears Roebuck catalog, where they had a variety of clothing, and or they also had little catalogs like this at nationwide chains that would sell by catalog. This catalog is from 1912, and we have heard many, many stories where ladies would look at catalogs like this and were able to adapt patterns, and they were able to make this same type of clothing. So they use that for, as we do now with magazines, you know, or internet posts, we use them as ideas and for fashion. They use the same thing. They had magazines, and they either made the clothing the way they wanted to, or they just bought it, and they had that as their good outfit for perhaps many, many years. This here is quite a famous sewing machine. This sewing machine comes from the illustrious Page House, which was where Parody Shop and Save is now. It was torn down in 1967. It was a Queen Anne shingle style house that was built in the 1880s. And this was the original sewing machine that belonged to Mrs. George Hampton Page. She was Hampy Page's first wife. Her name was Laura Bolton, and she died about 1914. And this sewing machine was given to us by a lady from Allagash, Judy Pelletier, who told me that her mother in the late 1960s, when they were tearing down the Page House, had gone to the yard sale there and purchased the sewing machine, and she brought it to her camp in Allagash because she didn't have electricity, and she used it. So Judy gave it to us, and forgive me, Judy, if you see this, I kind of doubted you, but with the original guidebook that was in the sewing machine, it said Mrs. George Hampton Page on it, Fort Kent, Maine. So we do know that this is was the Page family machine, or was in the Page house. And ironically, after we received the sewing machine, Rita Pelletier, a board member here, and she's also on the committee for the curatorial committee, who helped me with especially this exhibit. Rita taught me a lot about clothing and what to look for, and etc. This was a beginning of a dress, a bodice to a dress that was made on this very sewing machine by Laura Bolton Page. So Rita had gotten it as a young woman. She was working at the Page House. She worked for Hampy Page and his second wife, Alice Michaud. And she consequently got it, and she kept it forever and a day, and she donated it to us after. And we thought, what an amazing coincidence that we had from two different sources. We had the sewing machine from Judy Pelletier in Allagash, and then Rita Pelletier gave us a very garment that had been made on the dress. Interesting with this garment too, this garment was made by Rita Pelletier's mother-in-law, Mrs. Pauline Pelletier, and it was probably made before she got married. And Mrs. Pelletier was an expert seamstress, and she taught continual education classes for adult education, and she taught many, many men and women how to sew in our area. But this was again, a bodice. The skirt isn't there, but the beginning of an outfit that Mrs. Pelletier had designed and made a pattern for, and in turn sewed it. And for its era, this is probably before 1920. Yeah, it was really, really fashionable. She knew fashion, and she knew how to sew very well. She's an extremely talented woman. This is a complete wedding trousseau that belonged to a Fort Kent lady. Her name was Gertrude Nadeau Poitier. And her parents, Henry and Zéline Nadeau, had a millinery and ladies' clothing store where the American Legion is today. Actually, exactly same building. And Miss Nadeau had gotten married rather late in life. She got married at 32 years old to a dentist from Tracadie. He was very Acadian. His name was John Philip Poitier. And they got married in 1918, and this was her complete wedding trousseau. Everything she brought with her for her honeymoon. So we were given all of these things by a great nephew of Mrs. Poitier. His name is Eric Nadeau, and he's been a great patron of us for many, many years. So he gave us the complete outfit. And ironically, his mother, Bonnie Nadeau, had worn the outfit during Fort Kent's centennial 50 years ago. And she could not fit into the shoes. We have the original shoes down here. And before we got the outfit and the other items, Lucille Bouchard, who's been passed away now for 2 or 3 years, was a great patroness of the society. She donated those shoes. And those were the original shoes that had gone with the outfit. And Mrs. Bouchard was a founding member of the Fort Kent Squares, and she used those shoes. She danced 100,000 miles in them. She used them for square dancing. She had a size 4 foot. So, but these are the original shoes that go with the outfit. So not only sold in Fort Kent, even made, because shoes like these had come in pieces, and the local shop or the shoemaker would put them together, depending on the size of the person or the need of the person. But yeah, it's really nice to receive that, and it's really nice to see what of course her parents owned the store, but it's really nice to see that these clothes meant a lot to this lady, perhaps because she waited so long to get married. And what we've noticed with a lot of our collection clothes that people have given us is that they had very important outfits in their life that they kept forever, but only wore or used it once. But they kept it. So that's a lot of memories associated with each and every piece here in this exhibit. And moving on, we'll show you some more memories here. This coat was donated to us this summer by Mary Guimont-Daigle. She received it when she was about 3 to 4 years old. As a young lady, she went shopping with her parents to Mrs. Ella Roy and her daughter Jermaine Roy's store, the Fort Kent Millinery Shop. And Mrs. Guimont was in the market for a dress, but they saw this coat and decided to purchase the coat for Mary because she was their youngest. And so what's amazing about this coat, the coat has not only survived almost 75 years, it was worn by 4 generations of the Guimont and Daigle family. So it truly is something memorable, something, again, they kept their whole lives, and it was very important. And we thank Mary extremely for donating it to us for the Fort Kent Historical Society, because there was a story attached to it, and that's what we like the most. But although it was made in New York City and purchased there, but it was bought here in town, and we know the store, and the story again is wonderful. The coat, the small ladies' coat, is size 4, and this is a duplicate of the little boy's coat in size, the same exact size with the hat, from about the same era. And a lot of these outfits we've purchased through thrift stores, and the thrift store in Madawaska, the thrift store in Eagle Lake, and the thrift store here in town. I want to thank all of them for keeping their eyes peeled for us, and we were able to find a lot of old clothing that's not in style anymore, but when you look at it, it leaves a lasting impact and brings back memories. So here we have a great 1960s outfit with a bunch of clutch purses. This one is over 100 years old. It belonged to Mrs. Tom Pinkham Sr. completely out of leather, and the others are clutches from the 1950s. This one here is in particular the last one that we got. I stopped at a yard sale in Frenchville, and the woman that sold it to me told me that was her first purse that she had bought. She was about 12 years old, and she bought it for her sister's wedding. And again, she said her first purse, she never used it again, but kept it for close to 70 years. So Greta, her name is Greta Morneau, it was her sister's Lou Karen's wedding in the early 1950s. So that was her first purse. She kept it forever, never used it again. But when I purchased it for a very inexpensive price, she passed along that story. So when we add it into our collections, we're going to add that story because it makes it that much more valuable having the story. This one here, Don, is very, very unique that it was found in the wall of a home on North Pearlybrook Road. The lady that lives there, Rona Daigle, and her husband Clarence had recently been renovating the house and had worked on the kitchen, and when they were gutting their kitchen, they found clothes in the wall that was used as insulation, which was very, very popular. We see that here today. I've seen houses taken down where you find shoes and coats, and so this was out of the wall of her home. And when she pulled it out, she recognized it as belonged to her grandmother, who was actually a distant relative of mine. She was my great-great-grandmother's sister. And she made that dress herself. It's completely handmade and very well made, actually. And after she had no more, Mrs. Wuzin had no more use for it, it became insulation. So they used their clothing to the utmost. Either it became a quilt or it became insulation. It became something. So that was very nice, where again, we got the story with that. And this is another simple handmade dress that was probably made in the 1950s locally and still in style today. This is part of our hat collection. Most of these hats here were purchased by Mrs. Felix Duby. Her name was Albertine Martin, and they were the fourth owners of our Duby house here. And these hats were all purchased from Mrs. Roy. Mrs. Ella Roy, who ran Roy Millinery, and her daughter Jermaine had gone to New York City and actually made a lot of the hats that they sold in their store. They also purchased hats, however, to sell, but a good part of them were made right at the store. And that's actually what a milliner means, is a person who just sells hats. So she also sold ladies' clothing, though, but the main part of her business was hats. And Mrs. Duby was well known in the community to always purchase a brand new Easter hat. And so we have about 50 of them, and they were all purchased by Mrs. Duby over the years. She always wore, to the day she died, she wore a hat to church. We have a little men's store section here, and this one here was from Canan's men's store. It was donated to us by Doris Voisin Pelletier. It was her husband Fidzim's suit. And in the 50s through the 1970s, Arthur Canan sold suits right where Prudential is now, in Mark Morneau's accounting building. Back then, when a gentleman went into a suit store, be it the Canans or Savage Shoot Shop or Collins Men's Store, all suits came in pieces. So in turn, each and every suit was tailored to that person. So that's what we enjoy, that we noticed that everything was unique. And people, again, didn't have a lot of clothes, but whatever they had was very good and fit them very well. So this was an example of a suit that was purchased right here in Fort Kent. And on this part of the display, we have different hangers from different stores we've had in town here. This is Savage's Suit Shop. Ellis Klein, who was a Jewish family that had moved here turn of the century. And we also have a coat here that was purchased from the village squire. And because the village squire would make a commitment to the company, they would also put in their own label to advertise where it was sold. We noticed that's something that does not happen anymore. We live in a world where everything is one size fits all, and none of it, unfortunately, is made in the USA. But 40 years ago, everything was either tailor made or completely made unique to you. And this here is a display of some of the neckties that were sold over the years at Village Squire. Village Squire opened in 1970 here in Fort Kent. And I believe it didn't close. It changed name to Route 1 Fashions, and then unfortunately it burnt down in I want to say 94 or 95, and it was rebuilt and didn't last a whole heck of a long time. And then it became Swanbuck Restaurant. So that was, it used to be the old J.J. Newberry's building that became the Village Squire. The original location, however, was on Main Street, across the street from the post office. That's where they started out. This section deals in this display case with how people came into Fort Kent and bought the raw materials in order to make their clothes. So we have a bunch of, bolts of cloth here on the bottom and different zippers and different trims and buttons and even collars. And this case is a thread cabinet, and it comes from, originally it came from Elizabeth McClellan's store, which used to be part of Netto's House of Furniture originally in the 50s and 60s, and then Rose Netto purchased the business from her employer. Rose had worked for Mrs. McClellan for over 20 plus years, and she opened a new shop across from our town office, which is now our Masonic Hall, Masonic Lodge. But this thread cabinet belongs to her nephew and niece, Roland and Eva Bard, and they graciously loaned it to us for this summer, so we could display it and to honor a little bit of Rose and Mrs. McClellan. And also on the top here, we have a hat box that came from Mrs. McClellan's store, perhaps about the 1950s. Section here, Don, we have some of the signs from our larger shops that we had here in town. The glass ones were painted in the 1920s, 1929, I believe, by Gilles Bradbury, who was quite a well-known artist here in town. And the shop belonged to his wife and daughter, Ella and Germaine. And it was called Fort Kent Millinery Shop and Ladies Apparel. So those were part of the large vitrines that they had in front of the shop. And we do have an ad from turn of the century, probably about 1910, of Mrs. Philip Mornow's store, which was where S.W. Collins has their sports store, their up north, I believe they call it Up North Sports. That same building, and Mrs. Morneau had quite a lady shop there. And what I like, it says, "Ladies, listen, the entire stock of new fall merchandise consisting of ladies' coats, suits, dresses, millinery shoes, and smallware will be sold at amazingly low prices beginning Saturday, September 22nd. And you'll find the great opportunity at Mrs. Morneau's store." So there was two Mrs. Morneaus here in town that sold ladies' material. The second Mrs. Morneau also owned a hotel in town where the old Fort Kent Hotel in the present China Garden building is now. They tore it down in the 1930s. But Mrs. Morneau, Mrs. Felix Morneau had a store there, and she sold the same old things like material and cloth and thread and the basic raw materials to make clothing. This here is an ad for the grand opening of W.T. Grant's, which was where Sears Roebuck is now. It opened in 1939 here in Fort Kent, and we do have another copy of the same ad that we'll be putting up real soon, and it's the same ad but in French. So they really catered to their market. So they had two ads. They had an English one and they had a French one. Unfortunately, the original Grant store burnt down in 1945, and we went probably 5-6 years without a Grant store here in town, and then they built the present building where Sears is now in the 1950s, and then W.T. Grant's in the 1970s became McCory's, and a lot of people remember shopping there at McCory's. And what's interesting, in town, we had 4 chain stores. We had W.T. Grant's that sold clothing, we had J.C. Penney, and we had J.J. Newberry that also sold clothing. And those were national lines. Yes, this is another part of the Roy store signs. It's the ladies. And then the sign over the window belonged to Mike Ganem and Company, which was where Connie Terrio's Sheer Perfection beauty shop is now. And they sold men's clothing. So in here with the Village Squire, we have an original box, a gift box, and we have some of the bags. These were from the early 1970s when they opened. And then again, the ties. And then the coat that was sold there also. And that's what we enjoy, is we noticed that everything was so much more personalized and fitted to that person. So you paid a lot of money sometimes for a coat, but it was something that would last you a very long time. So you made those purchases judiciously, you know. This here is a hand-painted sign that was on top of Willette's shoe store, which was owned by Levitt J. Willette, who lived on Pleasant Street. But Mr. Willette sold shoes and other ladies' clothing for many years next to the Daigle Oil building here in town. And that was recently donated to us by Ken and Randy Saucier. This is something recently we've added to our collection, and it's a turn-of-the-century woman's corset. A lot of ladies, until perhaps the 1940s, they wore these to give themselves a hourglass shape. Not a very comfortable item to wear, but a lot of these dresses, you notice the waists are very small. Like this dress here, for example, that belonged to Fel de Billier, is only size 20, a 20-inch waist she had when she got married. So she weighed 98 pounds. Plus, she probably wore some kind of a, but the corsets eventually they graduated into girdles, and now I think the thing is Spanx that I've heard. But this was the original Spanx at the turn of the century. And again, not the most comfortable thing to wear, and a lot of ladies wore them when they were pregnant. This is something that's very unfashionable now, but it's something that we found a lot, that some ladies saved their whole lives to get, was a fur coat. And they also, if they couldn't afford the full fur, they also got collars. It was very popular in this area to have something like that. They were extremely expensive, even expensive to care for, but a lot of ladies had them, but that's something that is, we would even say taboo to wear now, because we do have some mink stoles, which is the full mink mounted on the collar, but that was something that was very popular, especially in the 1940s and 50s. And like, for example, we have a mink stole here that the young lady had saved a quarter of a year's salary to purchase. This is what a mink stole looked like. Back in the 1950s, something like this probably would cost $200 to $300. But Vanette had saved her money, and she had bought her mother this. And they go around the lady's neck like this. But extremely popular, but not so much now. Especially with the tails and the freaky eyes. This section of our display deals with, we have gloves on the bottom and different mittens and purses and handbags, but something that was an important commodity here in Fort Kent, we had quite a few jewelry stores over our lifetime. We have a nice little display in the other room on Sawyer's Jewelry Store, but most in the cases here we have boxes from Salomon Coty's jewelry store, or Coty's jewelry store, which was around from the 1930s to probably about the 1960s. So, and costume jewelry was something we noticed that a lot of people had a lot of and enjoyed. So that's part of our display on that. And then we have, like I said, the handbags. And this is something very unusual, and it's extremely rare. It's a ladies' hunting hat by Woolrich, probably from the 1940s. And it was found right here in Eagle Lake. These are two extremely unusual pieces in our collection, and it's two of my actual favorites because, again, there's a story involved with them. This bathing suit is made out of pure wool, and the young lady who owned it, she'd probably be about 105, 106 now. So the bathing suit's over 100 years old, and it belonged to Mrs. Priscilla Ballant Roy, who was Mrs. P.V. Roy, who taught many, many years at the high school. And but this was her wool bathing suit as a young girl. And the second article down here is a little special too. It's a, I guess you'd call it, it's a covering, I guess, for a nightgown. And the lady who had this, she used it exactly 7 times because she had 7 children. So she would wear this after her child was born and she was accepting visitors in bed. And so she would wear this. So this was extremely important. And the lady's oldest child now is 81, going on 82. So very old piece, and like I said, we noticed that pieces that had memories attached to them, they were kept and preserved, and now are here at the Historical Society to be preserved on long-term basis. So this year marks 100 years that the Knights of Columbus have been in Fort Kent. The founder, right on top, or the first chaplain, his name was Father Arthur de Carey. And Father de Carey was an interesting person. He was one of our last French missionary priests who came from the province of Quebec and was used by the diocese to take care of their French-speaking parishes. So Father de Carey, the last thing he did before he left Fort Kent was found the Knights of Columbus. As you probably know, the Knights of Columbus is a Catholic fraternal age organization, and the main goal when it was founded in 1882 in New Haven, Connecticut, was to provide life insurance. Something they still do today. But their main goal was to provide life insurance for families of people who had gotten killed either on the work or when they weren't working. So here, Don, we have an original Knights of Columbus fourth degree uniform. The first 4th degree that happened in Fort Kent was on the 2nd of July, 1944. And as you can see, it was held at the Madawaska Training School Gymnasium, which is now the Juanita Blake Library. And what's pretty amazing about this Knights of Columbus suit is that it's actually a mishmash of men who were in that first 4th degree in 1944. So the top hail, the coat and the pants belong to, or the tuxedo belonged to Fizim Pelletier Sr. And the shirt and the sword belonged to Alfred Sussy. The hat belonged to Teresa Doobie's father. His name was Felix Doobie. And finally, we were looking for Knight of Columbus cufflinks. And these cufflinks we found in the collection of Father Alfie Marquis. So the uniform is now complete. We are just missing a sash and a sword holder, but that's what we decided to do for this year, to honoring the Knights of Columbus, because they're an integral part of our community. They provide scholarships, and they also have the large hall, which their hall ironically turned 50 this year. Makes 50 years that they've had the same hall in the same location. So they're still going strong. And like I said, they provide a lot of charitable and works here in our community. This next section deals with the Fort Kent Police Department. In 1945, the town of Fort Kent went through a change of government. We went from a selectman form of government to a councilor form of government. And because we were such a large town, almost 5,500 people in 1945, they also formed a police department, an official police department, and other government agencies that we have now. So, in 1945, the first police chief was Gilbert Walker, and these uniforms from the 1950s belonged to the Fort Kent deputy at the time, Fizim Pelletier Jr., and those were the kind of uniforms they wore in the 1950s. And we also have the original badges, which was donated to us by Duty Michaud. And ironically, the uniforms are made out of denim. Extremely hot, I can imagine. The coat is also from the 1950s. It belonged to the first deputy, whose name was Clifford Picard, and eventually ended up with Fizim Pelletier. So this final mannequin is a dedication to one of the longest serving police chiefs in the state of Maine, Duty Michaud. And this is the last, or the type of uniform Duty was wearing when he worked his last day as Fort Kent's police chief. He graciously donated it to us, and he is on record to being one of the longest serving law enforcement officers in our state. He's still a sheriff. He works part-time with them, but that's his last uniform he wore as Fort Kent's police chief. He worked a total of 42 years. This siren was on the first police car that this town of Fort Kent purchased. Originally, when they hired Gilbert Picard in 1945, a car was not provided by the town, but Mr. Walker had his own car. However, in the early 1950s, when they hired Camille Caron as police chief, Mr. Caron did not have a vehicle. So he would have to be transported apparently one evening he had gone to, or somebody had picked him up to report an accident, and he gave them a summons. And the person that was giving him a ride said, well, you're gonna have to walk home. So that very day, Camille went to the town council and asked, and they decided to purchase, I believe it's a 50 Plymouth for the town police force. And this was the very siren that was placed on the bumper. So that was the first siren that anybody ever heard in Fort Kent. And this hat is a sheriff's hat, and a deputy sheriff's hat, and it belonged to a long-serving sheriff here in Fort Kent, Richard Netto, who was the son of Joe Netto, Fort Kent's first fire chief. And it was donated recently by his son, Eric Netto of Searsport. Really, really glad to add it to our law enforcement collection. This year is the 100th anniversary of having a fire department here in Fort Kent. The fire department was founded in 1919 by the first fire chief was Joseph H. Netto, who we just spoke of, his son Richard a while ago. We have an example of their full dress uniform from the 1950s through 70s. They have since changed the uniform slightly. We have a selection of fire badges. The top ones belong to Fire Chief Joe Netto. He was also the town fire warden and fire chief till his death in 1963 at a fire. He died of a heart attack during when Daigle and Holton burned down in 1963. On the other part of the case are badges that belong to Valier Ouellette, who was a long-term captain in the Fort Kent Fire Department. On the stand here, we have original fire equipment from that hat is from the 1930s, and we have photographs of some of the gentlemen wearing it. And that hat is more the 60s through 70s that they used. And now they have a completely different form of equipment. But that's a siren from an old fire truck. and we have 2 old fire extinguishers along with a fire axe. But what's interesting is on the bottom, in May of 1965, an arsonist tried to burn the high school. And the fire had started in the guidance office. And what's interesting, that is 3 books from the guidance counselor, Chuck Saunders' office, that are heavily charred, but those were in the office, or that's an artifact of that fire in 1965. This section is on Northern Maine Medical, or People's Benevolent Hospital, as it was called when it opened in 1952. And we have quite a few artifacts, along with some panels that were designed by the hospital staff, giving the history of the hospital, and then on this side it gives their future. So we have a variety of artifacts. This is an original slate part of the roof, and it was something that was painted by Janice Bouchard, and she painted it for Father Alfie Marquis, and that was in his things and papers that we now own at the Historical Society. We also have an original wheelchair that was in the hospital when it opened in 1952. There's still a label in the back that says People's Benevolent Hospital. And here, Don, are a few artifacts, mainly speaking of the opening of the hospital and the fundraising efforts that, of course, the main fundraiser of our parish to have the hospital was the community theater, which was a theater that was located in our convent's basement. And they raised a great deal of money to put toward the hospital. And that was the initial seed money in order to start construction. And this paper here is a bill from the hospital from 1957, and keeping in mind too the little Franciscans of Mary, who came here in 1906 originally, who ran the hospital, were very thrifty. But for a 12-day stay, a surgery, all her medications, and her lab work cost $175.15. So definitely the prices have changed. The room rate for a private room was $9 a day. And this is the original medical staff from 1952. I can name some of them: Dr. Savage, Dr. Albert, Dr. Morris Sear, Dr. Andre Sterling, Dr. Norman Sear, Dr. Edini Sear, Dr. Angst, Dr. Levac. And in the display case, we have a variety of objects that were either given out when the hospital opened, which 2 of my favorite things we have in the case are ashtrays that were given out when the hospital opened in '52. And we have baby books that were supplied by the hospital to each and every baby born at so they all say People's Benevolent Hospital. This section deals exclusively with a Madawaska training school, which was the precursor to our present University of Maine at Fort Kent. The Madawaska training school was founded in 1878 by Major Dickey, and Major Dickey passed the bill through the legislature, and their main point of establishing a training school to teach teachers how to teach French and in English. So the first principal was Vital Cyr, who was there from 1878 till he passed away in 1897. He was 49 years old when he died, but he died as he was the first principal. One of his first assistants was Miss Mary Nowlin, who became the principal after Vital Cyr died in 1897. And she was from Ashland, and she had been with the Madawaska Training School almost from day one. And she was there from 1897 to 1926. And she greatly expanded the curriculum, she expanded the dormitories, and she also built the model school, which was the theory school for the critique teachers. So she founded that. So on display here, we have an actual original desk from Sear Hall, which was built in the late 1880s and was consequently torn down in the 1960s when they built the new Sear Hall. But that's an original desk from Sear. And in the display case, Don, we have a variety of artifacts and different accompaniments about Madawaska Training School. To start off with our artifacts part here, the Madawaska Training School, we have a photo of their founder, Major William Dickey. We have an actual photograph of Miss Mary Nowlin. And we have some actual books that were used here at the university. We have graduation programs, we have patches, we have rank books, we have catalogs, early catalogs. Those two items are on the bottom are the two earliest yearbooks that the Madawaska Training School had in the 1930s and 1931. And also on the bottom, the large M's are sport letters from Madawaska Training School, and the small M's are sport letters from the model school. And all of those letters were in turn earned by a young man from Pleasant Street by the name of Vin Marquis. And his children donated them to us quite a few years ago. And finally, on the bottom, we have the last catalog that was issued by Madawaska Training School in 1955, when Richard Crocker was president. And unfortunately, in February of 1955, the large dormitory, Nowlin Hall, burnt down. And that was almost the death knell for the university, or the training school as we know it. It was reopened. Luckily, the state decided to continue, and it opened as Fort Kent State Normal School, and then it became Fort Kent State Teachers College, and then finally in 1974, I believe, it became the University of Maine at Fort Kent. This part of our display, which is in the exact middle of the room, is a beautiful dining room set from the 1920s. It's a colonial revival dining room set, and it belonged to quite a famous person here in Fort Kent. Her name was Dora Bradbury Pinkham. Dora Bradbury Pinkham is well known in state women politics because just 3 years after the 19th Amendment for the woman's right to vote, she was not only nominated by her party, she was elected as the first female representative in the whole state of Maine. She was born in New Limerick, Maine in 1891. And as a one-year-old moved to Fort Kent in 1892, where her family, her father and uncles and a cousin owned the largest employer in town, the Fort Kent Mill Company. She consequently was educated here in Fort Kent, but did not go to high school here. She went to high school in Houlton, which was the closest available at the time that offered boarding. And then later, after Houlton, she emulated one of her political mentors, Frances Perkins. She went to Mount Holyoke College, which is one of the 7 sister colleges. And then in turn, she got a master's in political science at Columbia, which Columbia, as everybody knows, is quite a prestigious and is still an exceptionally prestigious university. So her parents were, the employers of our community. She was extremely well educated. She came home and she taught at Madawaska Training School for some time. She taught in the model school. And then in 1917, she got married to Niles Pinkham, who is part of the Pinkham family of the Pinkham Lumbers and all that. So that's when we imagine she purchased this dining room set. So each and every chair is a little part of her life. So we have her early youth here with one of the earliest known photos of her. We have her education. And in 1923, like I was saying, she was elected. She was not only nominated, she was elected to the first term of the legislature. And this was her portrait that she used in the actual yearbook of the legislature for 1923. And we also have, which we'll show in a few minutes, we actually have the collage with all the other gentlemen, where she is the only woman in the whole picture. So here we have some artifacts about Mrs. Pinkham's life. We have a stock certificate from the Fort Kent Milk Company. We have a little bill from the Fort Kent Milk Company store, which people might remember as later becoming the store of Tom Pinkham, and it burnt in 1958. We also have a letter that was written by Mrs. Pinkham to a supporter while she was running for her second term as senator. And this here is a postcard that she sent out for the primary of her first term as state senator. So not only was this lady the first representative of the legislature in the state of Maine, she was also the first senator. And she served for 2 terms. And we still have things in Fort Kent that remind us of her, that she brought to us because of her political astuteness. So also, ironically, when she ran in 1923, she ran against her political rival, the Democrat, was a man by the name of William J. Audubon. So in 1923, she ran against him as a Republican, and he was Democrat, and he lost his election, his re-election campaign to her. However, in 1925, she lost the election to him. So she did not become part of the 1925 legislature, he did. Now, on December 4th, 1925, Paul Thibodeau, who was named our first president of the Historical Society in 1925, our first secretary was Dora Bradbury Pinkham, and our first treasurer was her political rival, Willie J. Audubon. So although they were political rivals, they got along well enough to form the Historical Society. Now, we were the first historical society ever founded in the Valley, and it was founded as not only a historical society, but a literary society. So they also read a lot, and they, perhaps an early precursor to the Fort Kent Chamber of Commerce, where they would develop histories of our town and develop handbooks, which a lot of people will recognize. There's a green little booklet about Fort Kent that was written in the 1920s, and that was part initially of the Fort Kent Historical Society's quest to kind of produce a register or a gazetteer of the people who live here and the businesses we had. So it was kind of like, so it was almost a historical society / Chamber of Commerce. Their first project as a historical society actually was restoring the blockhouse. They restored the blockhouse, cleaned it up, and made it serviceable to have tourists finally. Because when the state of Maine had purchased the blockhouse in 1891, they put a little bit of money into it then, and not a whole heck of a lot since. So it was luckily because of the Historical Society in the 1920s that it was extensively, I won't use the word restored. It wasn't restored correctly, but they remodeled it enough to have tourists come in. And they cleaned it up. And so here, Don, we have some panels on what she did as the first Maine legislator in the 1923 legislative session. She was the first person in the history of the United States to be made temporary Speaker of the House. She was the first one to ever to do that as a presiding officer. And then as senator in 1927 and in 1929, she was instrumental in getting the bookmobile, which was a portable library. She also got almost $100,000 to build the Madawaska Training School Gymnasium, which we now know as Juanita Blake Library. And she was instrumental in getting the federal money for the International Bridge, which was built in 1929, which makes 4 or 5 years has been gone that we have a new bridge, but she was the one that got us the initial federal reimbursement for the bridge. So Dora Bradbury Pinkham left a great legacy here to Fort Kent. Not only was she a founding member of BPW in 1929, she was the founding member of the Fort Kent Historical Society, perhaps of the also the Fort Kent Public Library was founded, which was a BPW project. So we also have a book in that display case that Mrs. Pinkham donated to the public library, and it was ironic because the woman, or the person who wrote it was written by a woman who took the male pseudonym of George Eliot. And it's a romance novel, so that's what she decided to donate to the library so many years ago. So this lady was at the forefront of women politics in the state of Maine. She paved the way for ladies like Margaret Chase Smith and Ella Leidy and Judy Parody and Hilda Martin out of Van Buren. These ladies were paid by this woman here. And again, only 3 years after women were 2.5 years after women were granted the right to vote, she got herself nominated and elected to the Maine legislature. Highly unusual. So Don, if you'd like to check out, this is the collage. This is the collage portrait of the 1923 Maine legislature. It was purchased for us off of eBay by Gilman Bully and his wife Martha, and they donated it just a couple of years ago now. And as you can see, there's over 100 men in this picture, but only the one woman. So that was her. So she was elected on the first try. But she was definitely working in the world of men. And what's ironic, in 1923, she was interviewed for the Lewiston Evening Journal. And the journal started out that Mrs. Dora Bradbury Pinkham is the first woman to be a member of the Maine legislature. Perhaps 100 years from now, in 2023, some woman governor of Maine and some legislature largely composed of women may desire to know how the first woman legislator carried herself, what impression she made as a legislature, and what the men said about her. And that's something now, just recently, we have elected the first female governor of the state of Maine, and the legislature and the Senate is largely composed of women. So again, the woman who was at the forefront was a young lady from Fort Kent. And this is continuing our part on the BPW, which Dora Bradbury Pinkham had founded in 1929. The BPW, unfortunately, we have some of their artifacts here. They are no longer a group here in town, but we have great memories of them. And this was a project that BPW member Vinette King did for the bicentennial in 1976. She recruited quite a few drawers and painters, and they put a memory quilt together on the history of Fort Kent for the bicentennial. So we have, of course, our US Route 1 sign, which we've been the beginning of US Route 1 since 1927. The Fort Kent Blockhouse. We have the oldest occupied house, which the Fort Kent Historical Society now owns, the historic Daigle Doobie House. We have our first town meeting, which transpired on February 23, 1869. We have a panel on our religious, the St. Louis Church, which was founded in 1870, the Congregational Christ Church on Pleasant Street, which was founded in 1895, and finally the Jewish temple or shul that we had a large enough population of Jews here that lived here in Fort Kent. They had actually had enough to have a temple or a shul here in town, and their synagogue was founded here in Fort Kent in 1914. It broke up in the 1930s, unfortunately, because they did not have enough, which the Jewish word is a minyan. They did not have enough minyans, which are, I believe it's 10 men who are bar mitzvahed in order to have a temple. So unfortunately it dissolved and the building was torn down in 1970, but it was still there. Our Madawaska Training School is the next panel, which was founded in 1878. And we just talked about the Fort Kent Milk Company with the Bradburys and the Mullins and the Dows. We're also involved in that. The Fort Kent Telephone Company, which was founded in 1895, which last year, if you folks remember, we had quite a large exhibit on the Fort Kent Telephone Company. We have our International Bridge, which we were just speaking of, which the money had been requested and received by Dora, Bradbury, Pinkham. And we also have Joe Long's suspension bridge, which was one of the only, or was the only international footbridge in the world. And it survived here in Fort Kent for over 30 years. The next panel deals with credit and the banking business in town. So they have the Fort Kent Trust Company, which was founded in 1903, and the First National Bank, which was founded in 1919. Both of these banks folded during the banking crisis of 1933. The Fort Kent Trust Company wasn't really an actual bank per se, it was more an investment company. And in turn, the First National Bank reopened with a slight name change. It went from the First National Bank of Fort Kent to the First National Bank in Fort Kent. So they just changed the name, but it was a completely separate bank. It had been liquidated by the Treasury Department. So consequently, they reopened under another name the very next day. This is the BPW symbol and their founding here in town. This is the railroad when it came through in 1902. The Postal Service, our oldest known postmaster, was here in the 1840s. So we have the Fort Kent Water Department, which was founded in 1913. The Fort Kent Electric Company, which was again 1913. And then of course, the story of Fort Kent cannot be told without the story of potatoes. We have our Fort Kent Fire Department, which is 100 years this year. And then there's a picture of the four seasons that Fort Kent experiences. I think the winter one should be much larger, but it's... And then in 1969, we celebrated the 100 years of being a town. And then our high school, was originally an arm of the Madawaska Training School that was founded in 1920. And then eventually in 1949 became Fort Kent Community High School, which meant that we had formed a high school district, which we were the first in the state of Maine to do. We formed a high school district with the towns of Eagle Lake, Winterville, St. Francis, St. John, and in turn we built our high school, expanded extensively, and they sent that here. It sent most of all the students here, the high school students. However, we're going through that same thing right this moment, where we're even consolidating further, and we're talking a very large high school for the whole valley. So I'm really anxious how that turns out and where the location will be. But okay, and again, so the high school was formed in 1920, and it was a part of the Madawaska Training School. So then you had an option of going to regular high school or going to training school to become a school teacher. Our public library, founded by BPW in 1936. And of course, part of our allure is the northern Maine woods and our game inspection stations. These final squares here on the bottom are quite new for the quilt, but this is the planning committee that was involved. So we have Natalie Charette, who is now Natalie Dubois, Jeanette Daigle, Rella Daigle, Claudette Plord, Vinette King, Louise Sear, and Simone Lag. And the artist for all of these was done by Vinette King. And the other committee members, and they were painters. So finally, we have People's Benevolent Hospital, which we just talked about. And then the Lonesome Pine Trail, which was founded in 1964. And then the Fort Kent Golf Club, which turned 50 just a couple years last year. And then finally, Don, these are all the painters that were involved with helping Vinette design the quilt. And Vinette designed it, but painting and putting it all together. So that was a project that was done in 1976, and the quilt has survived all these years. It was on display for many years at the Fort Kent Town Office, and was donated to us by Vinette King perhaps about 10 years ago. And it's one of our favorite pieces. So because we were honoring BPW and the life of Dora, Bradbury, Pinkham, we thought it appropriate to take it out. And because it was our 150th anniversary, we felt it was a piece that really helped interpret the history of our town. Here is a collection of Fort Kent souvenirs from turn of the century. They were mostly all sold out of a jewelry store that was built or founded in 1906, about where our library is now. It was a jeweler from Ashland who had moved here after the Bangor to Aroostook Railroad came through, and his name was Henry H. Sawyer. And he sold jewelry and touristy items out of his small shop where the library is now, which we used to call Military Square. But each and every piece, either a glass item or some of them are German bone china pieces, but they have different buildings of Fort Kent's history on them. For example, this is the Dickey Hotel, and there's a lot of them about the blockhouse. There's some of the Fort Kent Milk Company, some of the university, just very important buildings in Fort Kent. They're all bone china. We have some sterling silver spoons with the blockhouse on it. All things that were sold at that jewelry store to tourists. I've been collecting about 25 plus years on this collection, and I have 47 different pieces. Some people collect what they call Maine souvenir china, which that's what it is, and but I've only specifically collected Fort Kent, and 95% of them come off of eBay. Because you imagine a tourist item was taken away. It was never here, or didn't stay here long. But we have a variety of objects, from paperweights to little boxes, to candy dishes, to toothpick holders, to even goblets. So all of these were sold at that small jewelry store. Well, Don, I'd like to thank you and the viewers of Channel 4 to coming to visit us today, and we hope you come down to see us. We're open every day, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from 1 p.m. to 4. We'll be open for a few more weeks now, until probably October. So you come down and see us, but next year we promise to refine these exhibits and add a little bit to them, and so every year will be different. So we encourage people to come every single year.